there's a few things that's been going on in our society lately. We've had Bud Light involved in controversy a couple of months ago. We've had some tampon commercial, that included folks from the transgender community. And now, as of late, it's Chick-fil-A, because Chick-fil-A hired an officer for its diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So why am I bringing this up? Because to me, ladies and gentlemen, these outcries breaking out over DEI, what I want to say about that is that I hope y'all can appreciate that black folks feel a bit differently about this than most people might. Now, I don't speak for everybody. Everybody got their own thoughts. I'm just deducing based off of logic that black folks think a little bit differently than most of you folks about this stuff. And I think it's time that we have a discussion about it, because certain things are things that I just think need to be said. First of all, I am a proponent of DEI programs. I am not against it. I think it's something that is necessary in this day and age to have in every company in corporate America. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is incredibly pivotal to promoting and provoking peace amongst us all in our society. I'm not resistant to it. I'm not in opposition of it. And I find it hard to imagine any black person would be. And I'll explain why in a second. But when I think about some of the things that have transpired over the year, it throws me for a loop. For example, I remember in 2012 reading from something here. Issues arose between Chick-fil-A and the LGBTQIA plus community. By the way, those letters are getting very, very long. I'm just saying, I'm a supporter of it, but the letters are getting very, very long. Everybody doesn't remember. I can remember off the top of my head. LGBTQIA plus. I can remember it. But there's a lot of people out there that be like, LGBT. They don't even remember the letters. So I just want to throw that out there. That's number one. But number two, getting directly to Chick-fil-A. Remember in 2012, Dan T. Cathy, the international fast food restaurant's chief executive officer, made a series of public comments opposing same-sex marriage. This followed reports that Chick-fil-A's charitable endeavor, the Win-Shape Foundation, had donated millions of dollars to organizations seen by LGBT activists as hostile to their rights. Activists called for protests and boycotts, while supporters of the restaurant chain and opponents of same-sex marriage ate there in support of the restaurant. So there was a division there. There was a divide. National political figures, both for and against the action, spoke out, and some business partners severed ties with the chain. Remember that? We fast forward to now. Now they hiring officers to head their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. That's what they're doing. And because they're doing stuff like that, how times have changed. People are adapting to the times that we're living in. They're saying, wait a damn minute. We've got to be a bit more receptive. That's what we're saying here. And I'm going to read from this. I like putting on my glasses, even though I can read without them. I read better with them. Chick-fil-A, the chicken sandwich chain. This is from the New York Post in yesterday's paper. Chick-fil-A, the chicken sandwich chain long beloved by conservatives for its long-standing opposition to same-sex marriage, is sparking boycott calls after announcing that it has hired an executive in charge of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The Atlanta-based company named Eric McReynolds to the post of VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion 2 years ago. But social media users took note of it in recent days, igniting angry denunciations on Twitter from conservatives who allege that the firm has gone, quote, woke. First of all, understand that the man was hired 2 years ago. So the fact that you're making noise now, it doesn't escape me that we've got an election campaign anyway that's en route. Trump's already announced he's running. DeSantis already announced he's running. Nikki Haley's running. Chris Christie's expected to announce. In a week or so, Mike Pence, former vice president, is expected to announce. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are expected to run again. GOP got about 7 different candidates. All the Democrats have is Biden. who's going to be 82 years old at the time of Election Day. Now, you can sit up there and act like you don't notice that the furor over this coincides with an election campaign. You can bring up Chick-fil-A. You can also bring up Bud Light. Because if you remember the whole controversy they got themselves embroiled in, and reading from this again, because you got to remember this whole thing with Dylan Mulvaney, who was transitioning into womanhood, and how Bud Light decided to support her. Reading again from an article in the New York Post. Some corporations have to show how woke marketing could cost an iconic American brand dearly in terms of its image, its sales, and its market capitalization. Through its special beer can produced for trans influencer Dylan Mulvaney, Anheuser-Busch, in effect, volunteered for duty. And basically, by putting her on the cover of cans, their business dropped 17%, while their competitors like Coors Light and Miller Lite each grew 17%. So we could get into all of that, and we could get into the notion or the reality that involving yourself in political affairs could potentially cost you as a company. Now, I know some people sit here and they look at me and they say, who the hell are you to talk? Because you work for Walt Disney, and look what they're embroiled in Florida. We could talk about that another day. But for those who would make that argument, I can't summarily dismiss it. I'll say that much. Not when layoffs have occurred in the aftermath of it all. Not when we've lost $5.5 billion. Not when COVID cost Disney at the parks and at movie theaters. We could bring up all of that, but if you want to bring up something like this as costing them, knock yourself out. I'm not going to argue with you about that. It clearly has cost Anheuser-Busch, which, by the way, has 100 different companies, by the way. You might think you're not drinking Anheuser-Busch, but chances are you might be doing so without even knowing it. That is not my point about bringing up diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm bringing up diversity, equity, and inclusion because I want to know what the hell it means to y'all. Let me tell you what it means to me. Diversity. Having a diverse workforce and a diverse society. Equity, equality for all. Inclusion, being inclusionary in your thinking and your actions. That's what it means to me. You know what it doesn't mean to me? Having to like everything that you must accept. See, we got to be grown-ups here. And I get to say this because I have no problem with the transgender community. I have no problem with the homosexual community. I have no problem with immigrants or immigration or anything like that. I might not be the greatest supporter of open borders, but I'm certainly supportive of immigrants. I'm certainly not supportive of parents being separated from their children. I'm certainly not supportive of seeing people in the street without any place to live or any place to eat. And in the greatest country in the world, and the richest country in the world, with all the money that we've got to throw around for other issues, we could somehow come together in a bipartisan fashion to address the immigration crisis. Because the reason why it's a crisis is because we don't seem to know what the hell we're doing, and we don't have order. If we have order, people will be invited in. The process could be expedited. It could be resolved if we were committed to doing so. Immigrants have helped build this country. Immigrants have helped build this country. I'm not against that. You homosexual? It's your damn business. I have a right to not want to be a part of it. I don't want to be come on to by a homosexual. I don't want somebody thinking I'm one because I'm not. But I don't have any problem with somebody who is. Same thing applies to a transgender individual. You got no problem with that. But if our laws and our actions as a society is supportive of that from a legal perspective and from a civil liberties perspective, and you're left alone to live your life while others are living theirs, that to me is diversity, equity, and inclusion. You don't have to necessarily want to be entrenched in it. I like having a healthy sex life. I'm not someone that's particularly interested in prostitutes or porn stars. I ain't say they can't do what they're doing. I ain't say they can't live their lives. I'm just saying I don't flow like that. It's not a problem. They live. They let me live. We go on our merry way. We seem to be living in a society where people are acting like you're supposed to be forced to embrace with enthusiasm and fervor and jovialness and euphoria what you're not familiar with or what you might not necessarily want to vibe with. And I'm saying that shouldn't be the mandate. Live and let live. Make sure our laws and our society and our decorum and our behavior involves diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equal opportunities for everybody. Equal civil liberties for everybody. That's it. It just seems to me sometimes that we're on this mission to be so receptive that we got to show that we like things. It may not be our cup of tea. That's not a crime. And the reason I bring that up and it's so important to me is because as a black man, when have we not been fighting for diversity, equity, and inclusion? Nobody cared about whether we liked it or not. There isn't anything that you can bring up right now that hasn't involved black people. You want to bring up an immigration crisis? We've had to deal with that as black people. You want to bring up a diversity and inclusionary process and equality process? It's involved black people. Homophobia, transphobia, all of these other issues, misogynistic tendencies and all of this other stuff geared towards women, everything. Black folks have had to deal with everything, yet racism is on the bottom end of the totem pole. I could easily argue that concerns for black issues pale dramatically in comparison to some of the stuff we talk about in this day and age. The only time it has mattered in recent memory is when the whole social justice movement was taking place after the George Floyd murder, and there were protests in the streets. Outside of that, I'm not going to be as irresponsible to say that issues pertaining to black people don't matter. But I will say, once upon a time, it was in first place. Now we're struggling for fifth. Immigration, homophobia, transphobia. You can bring up all of that. That is a fact. So when I hear about diversity, equity, inclusion, and I see these programs, it amazes me that this is what we're talking about now. This is the same society that lamented. You had a whole bunch of people lamenting affirmative action. Well, what we talking about now? Seems to me like folks are demanding what black folks have been demanding for centuries. It's just that folks have caught up. And now our society is allowing them to usurp issues that pertain to black people. Why? Because in the transgender and the gay community and involving immigration as well, I guess one could easily argue those issues involve people of color as well. So because of it, black folks are not being ignored. My response would be simple. You could look at it that way. But who's been ostracized and marginalized and oppressed simply because of the color of their skin? I don't know anybody that could say that other than black people. But that's just me.